Welcome, Yassas Kerete, for our event, Europe after the elections. Cyprus has voted. Yesterday, the Cyprus citizens have gone to vote. Not even 24 hours ago, the closing was there. The results have been presented, and we're going to do so together with a few facts and figures concerning Cyprus, because, let's be honest, we don't know that much about this third smallest member country. Only Malta and Luxembourg are even smaller than Cyprus, and Cyprus has, in the public perception of the last 12 months, not really played a major role. Maybe in foreign policy, when it's about gas trainings from Turkey in front of the coastlines, or the dispute concerning the golden passes, but as far as economic policy is concerned, the recognition of the halloumi cheese as a regional brand on a worldwide basis has a major effect on the Eurovision Song Contest. There was the scandal that apparently there were threats against the Cyprus radio station, that they needed police protection. But beyond that, we don't know that much about Cyprus. So that's why we'll deliver a few elements of information. 550,000 people could vote. 15 parties were presenting themselves. Almost all Greek Cyprus citizens are taking part in the elections, because the northern Cypriots are on the other side of the border. Well, since 1974, we have a separated structure on the island between these both parts, and that's why only the 56 representatives of the Greek party, the 24 seats of the Turkish Cypriot community, are vacant since the beginning. It seems complicated, but we will learn more about this right after this introduction. So not an easy situation to start with, but still a virtual meeting online, because the pandemic situation doesn't allow us to have this on a presential basis. Mark Weinmeister, Secretary of State for European Affairs of the state of Hessen, is connected virtually to us for his welcoming address. Hello, Mr. Weinmeister. Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Engel, for the very kind words of introduction. I would have loved to be with you in Brussels today, because this series of Europe after elections is of the utmost interest for me personally as well in my function. So from afar, we are observing the elections in our neighboring countries, the other member countries of the European Union. And on the other hand, it's really a fact that in a lot of parts we have to read more details concerning the composition of the electoral community, the parties, what interesting topics have been marking the electoral campaign. Cyprus has had a particular interest for us, because it's an island split in two, the Greek southern part and the Turkish northern part. And actually, it's one of the member states that have been with the EU in the package of 10 countries since 2004. So this was a major wave at the time, and we're observing precisely what's going on there. The discussion about the golden passes has been mentioned by you, Mrs. Engel, and we're wondering what the repercussions of that will be during an election. The system in Cyprus is different again as compared to ours, because there's a presidential constitution. The president is being elected, who will compose then his or her government. So the parliamentary elections do not have a direct influence on the composition of the government, as we would know from Germany or other countries. Next presidential elections will be in 2023. But nevertheless, it's a very important indication of the tendencies of the moment. And as far as I can see, the two major parties have been involved yesterday, both losing about 3%. But the third strongest party has been reducing its importance as well, and it's precisely the smaller parties that became more important. It's a tendency we can observe in many European countries right now. The major blocs, Social Democrat and Christian Democrat, so left or right or conservative parties being the major ones, are losing in importance, and the smaller ones are coming up. Next to the question of corruption linked to golden passports, and according to inquiries amongst the population, one of the most important topics, well, the consequences of the corona pandemic are one of the most important ones here as well as in other European countries, obviously. And the vote is based on the results and the performance here as well. So really happy to have Yiorgos Kakouris with us today, who is an eminent expert of the Cypriot scene, working for Alpha TV and for the daily papers in Cyprus. And he's best positioned to give us a good insight in the things that happened yesterday in Cyprus and what the Cypriots had as an opinion tendency to have an influence on their vote. So I'm really looking forward to the analysis we are going to hear. And I wish to all of you, dear audience, a very interesting and exciting hour here in our company. I hope you will remain in good health, and I wish all the best to you and an interesting event. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Weinmeister.
English now, but in case you are wondering, there is an interpretation on the other channel available. So if you have any questions concerning Cyprus or want to participate in our event, please send an email either on streamline@lv-brussels.hessen.de. You see that now in the stream, or you can also call us. So give us a call on +32 472 030181. You can also see the number here in the screen. So we have Yiorgos Kakouris with us. He's our voice of Cyprus in our EU correspondent bubble. He is the EU correspondent for Alpha TV and also for the newspaper Kathimerini. So he knows obviously everything about Cyprus, and he has followed the events in his homeland very closely. He returned from Cyprus just a few days ago, came out right of quarantine to be here to tell us about what happened in Cyprus, and he will give an overview over yesterday's results, and afterwards we will analyze what that means for Cyprus and also what that means from a European perspective. So please, Yiorgos, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gudrun. Thank you, Minister, for your introduction. This is going to be we're going to start with an overview of the situation, of the results. It's a complicated situation, as you said. It doesn't take necessarily an expert to explain, but it takes someone who has been following the things daily to give you a good overview of the situation. So the results that we had, yesterday, last night, been following them for mainly through my employment, but also for Europe Elects, a website that follows European elections throughout the continent. You can see them on your screen right now. The results that we've had is we've had a minor fall for Δημοκρατικός Συναγερμός, Democratic Rally, the EPP-related party, down to 27.8. It's the lowest result that it has gotten in its history so far. Akel hasn't managed to bank onto dissatisfaction with the past 8 years of DC governance and is still at 22.3, fell further from their last election. They belong to the group of the European left. Vico, the traditional kingmaker party that sits with the SD, the European Parliament, kind of retained its position but still lost some percentage and is at 11.3 and retains 9 seats as before. The surprise of the election, or rather something that was expected but it's a new development, is the doubling of the percentage and the seats of far-right Elan, which is a sister party to the Golden Dawn in Greece. EDEK, the traditional fourth place socialists, managed to stay roughly in the fifth place with 4 MPs, but they only managed to do this in coalition with another party that had been doing really badly in polls in the past few years. The surprise of the election is DIPA, a party related with Renew Europe, formed by people that broke off from DICO and managed to get a 6.1% of the vote. These are the rough results from 99% of the count yesterday, but not much changed compared to the final results. They entered the parliament with 4 MPs, and it will be interesting to see how they align themselves in the future when it comes to passing legislation. And the last party to enter the parliament is the Greens, Kínima Οικολόγων, which had 2 MPs. It was predicted by polls to gain even 4. It underperformed those predictions, possibly because of abstention, and even lost a little bit of its percentage. But it managed to elect an extra MP due to the way that seats are divided after an election. And the final party that you can see on the graph, it's Kínima Ελεγγύη, from a former MEP. It's a party that's close to ECR. It didn't manage to elect a single candidate this time around. So there you can see the allocation of the seats as before. As you can see, the 2 major parties don't add up to the magic number of 29, which is the 50+1 in order to pass and have majorities in the parliament. Traditionally, VC and Akeli would team up with DICO to pass legislation, budgets, etc. Now that is not going to be possible, so there's going to be a lot of back and forth and alliance building in the next 5 years. And a quick presentation, as Gudrun mentioned, the head of state is also the head of government. It's President Nikos Anastasiadis from DC. He will be in the presidency until 2023. He is not likely to run for a 3rd term, but the results of these elections will color the situation as it develops ahead of the next elections and the next candidates. Δημοκρατικός Συναγερμός is headed by Veros Neophytou. This showing was its worst as yet, but it managed to, and even lost a seat in parliament, but it has been selling this result as a success to the media because it managed to retain the first place despite the multiple criticisms that the government has been receiving on multiple issues, some of which Gudrun mentioned. Akela, the leftist party, which sits with the left but is in practice a social democrat party, didn't manage to bank on the criticisms on the government and might enter into a bit of a crisis right now in order to see what went wrong. So it will be an interesting thing to see how they will handle these results and how they will strategize ahead of the presidential elections. DICO was expecting to get an increase in their seats. They campaigned banking exclusively on corruption, which didn't seem to convince the electorate. They retained their percentage but didn't get the success that they expected. So they're also going to be getting into a bit of a soul searching in the next period. Elam, the far-right party, as I mentioned, is a party of the Golden Dawn. It has carefully distanced itself from it since Golden Dawn got into legal trouble and eventually ended up in jail in Greece. Tries to sell itself more as a far-right nationalist party rather than a neo-Nazist extremist party. It draws some support from DC. So as in many countries, the EPP-related parties and the far-right tend to feed off on each other. It was expected that it would gain MPs, but it's a surprise that it managed to get 4th place for the first time. EDEK is a traditionally social democrat party that has been falling in certain years. It only managed to enter now in alliance with Συμμαχία Πολιτών, which is a liberal party. This is a surprise of the election. Polls were showing Δημοκρατική Παράταξη, which is an offshoot and a break-off from DICO, as maybe getting 1 MP in parliament, but they ended up entering with 4. This is attributed to their better organization and also the associations that traditional DICO voters which went to this party have with wanting a party that's closer to power and more open to discussing with the current government. That's a big different story that we could discuss later if you want. Charalambos Papadopoulos is the leader of the Greens. The Greens in Cyprus, as opposed to other European countries, have not been able to bank on the dissatisfaction with the state of the environment, especially in Cyprus. This has become an issue. It has opened up in recent years from its traditional positions, which tended to be a bit more, let's say, nationalist in the sense on the Cyprus problem, to open up to other progressives in order to gain power. It has managed to get the extra MP and to open up to this segment of the population, but something went wrong there, and we'll see what they do with it in the next 5 years. And this is finally from Allelenghi, the party that didn't enter parliament. Eleni Theocharos was an MEP with DC until she broke off to join the ECR and to make her own party. It's unsure if she'll play a part in the future. Finally, this is one of the interesting experiments. Αλλαγή γενιάς, originally meaning generation change, or originally Anexartiti, independence, was a party willing to bank on the dissatisfaction with corruption, mismanagement, etc. It puts itself in the center and center-left. It was in alliance with another party movement of a special lobby movement defending hunters' rights, which is a whole different story. They had a fallout just before the election, so the expectations that Αλλαγή γενιάς would get maybe 2 to 3 MPs did not pay out, and it was left out of the parliament. So this is my presentation. Thank you. I hope I didn't get into too much detail. That might be too confusing. Gudrun will give me the questions.
Yeah, thanks for all these interesting facts. I'm truly glad that you are pronouncing all those names that I read in preparation but could not pronounce myself. So thanks a lot. We'll go a bit more into detail.
Up to you.
But also first, again, the reminder, if you want to participate in that event or you have a question concerning Cyprus, please let us know. Send an email to streamline@lv-brussel.hessen.de, and also you can call us. You see the number also in the stream right now. It's +32 472 030181. You see both in the stream right now. So, 8 parties, as far as I counted, let's say 6 and a bubble of 2, have taken the barrier. It's a 3.6% barrier, as far as I know, but also all the big ones lost. This is something that we experience throughout whole of Europe at the moment, this fragmentation. For instance, last time in the Netherlands, we will experience it supposedly in Germany in autumn. Now on Cyprus, why is that? Why that fragmentation?
This fragmentation started happening from the past elections in 2016, when we had for the first time, I believe, 8 parties. It's due to dissatisfaction with the political system. As it is, DC and Engel have been, together with Vigo, have been at the forefront of the political system, running things, exchanging governments during the years, with Vigo supporting first one side, then the other, depending on the coalitions of the time. But because of chronic mismanagement of the country, endemic corruption, which was shown even more during the recent passport scandal that you've all seen exposed on Al Jazeera, people do not trust the traditional parties as much anymore. But the problem is that people don't know where to go to give those votes. That's why you see the fragmentation. But at the same time, you see Cypriots being a bit more conservative at how they go about expressing their dissatisfaction. Cypriot society doesn't tend to be... In which way? Cypriot society doesn't tend to be revolutionary in that sense. A lot of times they will not necessarily vote for 5-star movements or give the far right the first place from the beginning. They will go to smaller parties, but they will hedge their bets to an extent, and maybe go to the more established ones, which is why you could see DIPA, which broke off from Vico and has a basis of of voters that want a bit more stability, and they want also, to be blunt about it, access to power and access to the old school party politics favors, etc. Selecting DIPA instead of DICO. And that's why you see voters not necessarily going for the completely new unknown parties, but selecting and staying with things that they're familiar with, such as the DEC, which retains its power to an extent, or even the Greens, which retains its power. So people are it's really difficult for them to switch to radical options. But the result is a bit of it's also a bit of a result of the last-minute drama that happened with Allagi Genias, the latest party that was really showing that it might enter the parliament. It would have been perhaps a new force, but the last-minute drama that broke them off from their alliance really resulted in both of them getting down. So we would never know how that would turn out.
But speaking of alliances, now they all need an alliance. So if I don't vote for one of the big ones, but give it to a smaller one, still can I know, or do Cypriotic people know what to expect from the alliance now? Because if I give my vote to a smaller party, they still have to come together and make a compromise somehow.
They more or less know what to expect, and that's why, again, they tended to go more towards the established parties, even the small ones, because they know what to expect more or less from EDEC and the Greens, but it's not as clear-cut as knowing exactly who will align with who. It's roughly expected that DIPA will tend to support the government more than DICO does right now, so we can see that happening there. EDEC supported the government when it came to the budget last time, but is critical on other issues. So that's also something that is fluid. And the Greens tend to be very critical of the government, and you can see that they stayed at the same point.
But did tactical questions on alliances play a role beforehand? Because this is something we experience in other countries, that it's always a big fuss about who is doing a coalition with whom. So is that a topic as well? Okay,
I see what you mean. Because of the system in Cyprus, which is presidential, the parties don't tend to, ahead of time, speak of how we will align ourselves and how we will form a government, because a government is not formed. The alliances are based on the issue of the day, on the issue in question at the time, and they're based a lot of time also on micro-political give and takes. I'll give you in this and you'll give me in that. The alliances will play out ahead of the presidential election, which is where the thing that you're more, the alliance building that you're more familiar with in Germany happens, when parties start thinking about who we will put forward as a candidate. So there was a discussion, it started to happen now, and the discussion will happen now. There was a discussion whether Akel Diko and the Greens could field a candidate that would support together against the DC candidate in the next elections. But now, because of their limited showing, there might be a re-examining of that alliance. But alliances in the sense that you talk about, where parties sit down and coordinate on a joint program that they then all approve, that doesn't happen.
So we've seen that the very right-wing party has doubled their votes, and we've seen a tendency towards right-wing parties all over Europe, but this right-wing party is especially related to, as you mentioned, the Golden Dawn in Greece, which, if we would have an equivalent in Germany, it would be like the Hells Angels motorcycle club, criminal organization, would form a party. But still, we've seen that all this trouble with the Golden Dawn in Greece, but still they were very successful in Cyprus. How does that work?
It's multiple things. Their methods and their outlook differs a bit because society is different. The far-right hooligan type criminal organization that Golden Dawn is doesn't fly as easily in Cyprus, which is a bit more of a conservative society. What Elam has done is, as I've said before, after Golden Dawn ended up in court and in jail, they started distancing themselves, and at the same time cultivating a profile of a more far-right nationalist party, I guess similar to Le Pen or even AfD, that it's not exactly ready for violence on the streets. And you can see it from the MPs that they elected, that there's these synthesis of those things that are similar. When you mention the Hells Angels, for example, you'd get football hooligans. So there's support from far-right or right-wing football hooligans, kids that are being inspired by certain things. But you also get a former MP from DC, from EPP, from the EPP-affiliated country, being elected with Elam, which shows really the way that the right and the far right tend to run into each other, and that happens all over Europe.
But how, how much fear, probably, well, fear is a bit a strong word, but how worried should we be about this come out of the very far right?
Well, it is worrying because it shows that there are voters ready to come out and say that they're far right and that they don't mind racist rhetoric. It's not yet extremely worrying, but it's worrying that it's increasing and it's there and it's establishing itself as a central part of the political spectrum. We'll see now in action whether they will bank on this and whether they will be braver by this and act in the way that they acted when they first came out, with marches in the streets and being accused of violence, etc., in the same way the Golden Dawn was, or whether they'll continue their path towards trying to be a respectable party. But the real problem, to an extent, is not so much their rise, it's the fact that other parties are not willing to isolate them or they're willing to countenance alliances with them. So the budget that was a big issue at the beginning of the year, which was not passed the first time because of disagreements between the parties, the government managed to pass it by also getting the support of Elam, and they didn't hold their nose and said, okay, they let it happen and they said it's okay. Some of the positions that they have are interchangeable with some of the MPs, even in DIGO, which is supposedly centrist, and even in other parties. So the real problem is not the rise of the far right itself, or rather that is the rise, that is the problem. But another problem that comes with it is the existence of the far right and far right ideas in other parties as well that make this look normal and not scary to people.
So we've seen this change or this tend to the right in other European countries. But what is different in Cyprus, though, is that the big losses of the Greens, whereas Green parties in other European countries are in the rise. The Greens in Cyprus kind of have only half, or scored only half of the votes they had before, nearly. What is the problem with the Greens? Why are topics like probably climate change, etc., not so popular in Cyprus?
So to correct you a bit on the numbers, it's that they got about half of what was expected from the polls, which is also very important as well. And what happened is that they kept their percentages to an extent, but lost 0.4%, which is small, but given what was expected of them was really disappointing, because polls and people answering polls were always giving the answer that we'll vote for the Greens and they're convincing us, etc. But it didn't pan out, maybe because people didn't show up. Now, to answer the larger question about this, Green politics was slow in coming to Cyprus, but it has come. You see now even protests, and you've seen for the first time popular protests in the streets not affiliated with parties happening about climate, which is unusual for Cyprus. We don't tend to go to the street that often.
Like Fridays for Future.
Yes, during that time, Cyprus really got into it, and there is a young cohort of voters and future voters that are interested in this and want to go along with this. The problem with the Greens is that, I guess, to survive in the politics of the 90s when they started coming up, they also adopted, except for Green politics, they also adopted a more, in Cyprus we say nationalist, but it's misleading in other contexts, a more hardline position on the Cyprus problem and the reunification question and whether federation is the right answer, etc., etc. That stance discouraged a lot of progressive voters that didn't want to vote, for example, for Akel because they disagree with how it has handled government, etc. Or they didn't want to vote for DC because they see it going to the right when it needs to go to the right. The natural vote would perhaps be the Greens, but they were discouraged from doing so. Now, for the first time, the Greens made openings by including in their candidates people that are openly pro-solution and maybe that's the wrong term, openly pro-federation, much more progressive in many other things. And it has paid off to an extent because one of those candidates was elected according to the latest results. But it has also tried to do an opening up to a bit more populist candidates and voters that really discourage some of those progressives. So those two different, that experiment and that gamble didn't directly pay off. But the interesting thing now is that because of how the system and the apportionment of the votes work, they got enough votes to get their 2 MPs like before. But during the second apportionment of votes, which happens regionally, they managed to get a 3rd one, which was lucky for them because it gives them a perspective to go forward. So it would be interesting to see which lessons they get from this election, whether they'll think that trying to open up to progressive voters is a good thing and it paid off, or it didn't. It's going to be interesting to see which way they go.
But this is now, I wanted to get to that point later, but now that you've mentioned it, the question of federation or the question of a solution for the Cyprus division. How big of a role really, because now you said many people didn't vote for the Greens before because they were very strict on that question. So in this election, for the first time, we had a party that was stressing especially on that question. So we sometimes see that there are parties that focus on one question only. So this is the question about how to get on with the division of the island. How big of a topic is that still when it comes to elections?
It's a topic that overlays everything else. The way that I found it easier to explain is when you talk about parties in Cyprus, you think of the 2 traditional axes of politics, economics and social issues, and then you have a 3rd one, which is the Cyprus question. So you would have, for example, and the axis there is about, are you pro-federation, bizonal, bicommunal federation as it's called, the system that's been discussed for 50 years, and that is basically the main thing promoted by the UN and the big parties? Or are you skeptical towards that and believe that you need maybe a unitary state or a different kind of setup? That's a whole different theoretical situation that we don't have time to go into. But for example, you get DC and Engel, the main parties, being in support of that model, and then you get the smaller parties tending to be more critical towards it in varying degrees. So DICO, for example, would be more critical towards the system, accepting it but wanting less autonomy or less power. I'm very simplifying for the Turkish Cypriots, while DIPA is promoting itself as being more open to that discussion. The Greens, as I've said, EDEC, even though it's socialist in everything else, when it comes to this issue, they have come against this. They're the only party that has said we do not agree with the federal solution as envisaged by the UN, so we need to discuss something else. So you can see that social economic positions and the Cyprus problem do not necessarily correspond with each other, which makes things much more complicated and affects the votes of people during parliamentary elections, even though the parliament itself doesn't have powers when it comes to the negotiations. The negotiations with the Turkish Cypriot community are handled by the president, who is also the leader of the Greek Cypriot community in the constitution.
But what we see now with the results that you have presented, and you would look like what alliances might be possible in the outcome, is that what kind of view do they have on the solution? Is that more a pro-solution? Is there something like really going on? Because our impression was that the northern part of the island was really like taking a break, so that it really is a standstill. So I've been wondering now, after the elections, is there a new impulse, probably?
Without going too much into details, you're right. Right now, we're at an impasse of the situation. It doesn't seem to be going anywhere, partly because of the stance of the Turkish-Cypriot side and Turkey, but also because of the time lost by the government in the past few years, since 2007, the last attempt to solve this properly. The issue is really now, the Cyprus problem is that the government has been heavily criticized for discussing behind the scenes possibly a two-state solution. It has denied that it has done that, but it has given a hit on their support because other people have decided to vote something else. But the Cyprus problem doesn't seem to be enough of an issue, exactly because nothing is happening right now, to make people withdraw their support from the government and to vote for someone who more heavily advocates for a solution or for a faster movement. So the fact that the negotiations are now are now stagnant, it also affects the effect that this discussion can have on elections.
So, because we have a question also on that from Dr. Kurt Geisert from the House of European History. He wanted to know, does the election result improve or disturb? That's basically what you also said now. Improve or disturb the chance for a dialogue with Turkey?
I would say neither, because the main power goes, it disturbs perhaps the internal climate that the government has to handle in case it moves forward with a dialogue with the Turkish Cypriots and Turkey. But in essence, it does not change things directly. What we've seen right now is the two main pro-solution parties retain more or less their dominance even though they lost seats. And we see a party that is not against a solution entering the parliament, surprisingly. So if you were an optimist, you would say that this election gives some positive indications for that. If you're a pessimist or try to be cynical like me, try not to be unpleasantly surprised by unpleasant surprises, you'd say that it really will not affect things if the government itself is not ready to make those moves that they need to make.
Okay, so I would go for the optimistic view. Hope. Let's hope. So, as you've mentioned already, now the parliament is a legislative body. So they amend and they propose the laws, etc. But they are not really bringing forward the head of state, etc. So head of state and president is kind of
the same person.
But they are the ones fighting against, for instance, corruption. So we've spoken shortly about the golden passports. Is that something that is a topic in Cyprus as well? Because I understand that Cyprus needs the money because tourism is down at the moment due to Corona. But this is something that was heavily criticized, even by Ursula von der Leyen. So is that something that the population of Cyprus feels we need to do something about this?
Well, it is a major issue in Cyprus, and when the distrust and the discontent with this situation has been building since the reports from the UK Mother Commission, I believe in 2018 or 19, it has been building, and it really broke in protests that were unseen from after the Al Jazeera documentary, because it exposed that it wasn't just the government and people affiliated with the government that was doing it. It was also MPs from the opposition. It was also the president of the parliament himself being involved in this shenanigans. So people do feel like something needs to be done about this. The government has been defending the program by saying it needed to be done. We needed income, and other countries are doing it, which no one is really contesting. Malta. No one's really contesting that this program can be useful, but it has been abused by people close to the government, and you can see it in the reports that keep coming out from an independent commission on this. And it was abused by a lot of people in the ruling class of Cyprus, and that has really angered people. But people don't know necessarily where to direct their votes. But it is a major issue, and it is a very central issue of discussion right now. Not just the golden passports themselves, because the program has been discontinued, but this behavior of a class of lawyers, accountants, and in-betweeners that just use their positions to bring in investment, which really means money that is laundered and goes, some of them, in their own pockets, while meanwhile tarnishing the name of the country. So that has really angered people, and it still angers people.
So the winning party, or the alliance that is big, is normally the kingsmaker for the next president. Next presidential election will be in 2 years' time. The current head of state, Anastasiades,
Yes.
he just announced that he will not run for a third term. So he had 2 terms, and he will not run a third time. Do you see now from these results that there is already someone who can be built up to become the new president of Cyprus?
So this is the favorite parlor game in Cyprus right now, talking about the names, etc. It's all very fluid. There are people interested from the right wing to get into, I don't know if you want to go into names, because that might be
complicated, as you have
complicated.
realized.
Yeah, but roughly there are people, multiple people from the right wing that would like to run to represent DC in the elections, but they know that the government is tarnished and the ruling party is tarnished and has been losing support, and they really will be looking how to present a fresh face. That would be the challenge there. But you would need a fresh face that would get the votes of the right-wing voters, but also appeal to centrists and more progressives. And that is really difficult as things are right now. In the other side of the equation, which would be Akel, Diko, they were in discussion about finding someone to support rather than someone from their own ranks, because they know that will be difficult for them to convince people to vote for a party political person. We'll have to reconsider how they'll do it exactly now that they see that they don't manage to take advantage of the discontent against the government, and also in order to increase their percentages. So the game is only now starting, and you will see the first indication of where the game is heading when the parliament elects its next speaker. So if you see a speaker that comes from that group that's against the government, Akel, Diko, Greens, it could be an interesting indication that alliances are being made. If you see someone that DC and Akel are both jointly pushing, that would mean that no one knows exactly what to do yet about that future alliance building. So we would need to look into really details in order to get indication of where this is going.
Okay, but as we've learned, the game is just starting. Now we have the results of the elections, and now the game for the new president is kind of starting. Thank you so much, Yiorgos, for all this information and insights, and answering all those questions. I think we learned a lot about Cyprus, and that if we are optimistic, there might be a solution one day. We don't know yet, but we hope. So thank you all for joining us. There is one more event here in der Landesvertretung des Landes Hessen bei der Europäischen Union, die ich Ihnen sehr gerne ans Herz legen möchte.
A next event here in the representation of Hesse to the European Union on the 8th of June, therefore next week at 1 p.m. There will be the presentation of the 5th competition. The youth researchers, Jugendforscher, will hear about very interesting results on the 8th of June at 1 p.m. The presentation of the 56th competition, youth researchers. Thank you very much indeed for your attention, and stay healthy.